The long-pending India-US trade deal and the Indian and the United States, both the sides are now reportedly close to finalizing a bilateral trade agreement, with negotiations entering what is defined as the final stretch. Commerce Secretary Rajesh Agrawal said on Thursday that the deal will be announced once both sides are ready. Speaking to reporters, Rajesh Agrawal said negotiating teams from India and the US are currently discussing virtually all pending issues, adding that talks have never broken down and that engagement between the two sides has remained consistent throughout. The momentum comes after a series of high-level engagements. In late December, Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal held a virtual meeting with US Trade Representative Jamison Greer following a visit by a US delegation led by Deputy US Trade Representative Rick Switzer earlier that month. Now, earlier this month, in the month of Jan, US Ambassador to India Sergio Gore also underlined that both countries are actively working to firm up the trade deal. The push for a deal comes despite recent strains in bilateral ties. The Trump administration's steep 50% tariff on India, along with disagreements over immigration policy and other political issues, have added pressure to the relationship. Even so, Agrawal said bilateral trade between the two countries continues to post positive growth and New Delhi remains optimistic. And from US, let's pivot to the European Union. And India and EU could be on the verge of sealing that long-awaited free trade agreement, with talks intensifying ahead of a high-profile visit by top EU leaders to New Delhi later this month. The President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will be in India from Jan 25th to 27th at the invitation of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The two leaders will serve as chief guests at India's 77th Republic Day celebrations on Jan 26th and will co-chair the 16th India-EU summit the following day. Trade Secretary Rajesh Agrawal has said that New Delhi and Brussels are very close to finalizing the trade pact, with efforts underway to see if it can be wrapped up before the leaders meet. According to Agrawal, 20 of the 24 chapters of the ambitious agreement have already been finalized, with negotiations continuing on the remaining issues on a day-to-day basis. Remember, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has also indicated that the deal could be signed by the end of January, as he recently visited India. Merz urged both sides to move quickly, saying that agreement would help stabilize supply chains that have faced repeated disruptions. And it's not just US and Europe. Let's continue to stay with trade deals. India and Canada are moving a step closer to restarting negotiations on a long-pending free trade agreement, with both sides now working to finalize the terms of reference. Commerce Secretary Rajesh Agrawal said that New Delhi and Ottawa are engaged in discussions to finalize the scope and framework of a mutually beneficial trade pact. He said the government hopes to complete this process soon, allowing formal negotiations to begin. Trade talks between the two countries were earlier underway but were paused by Canada in 2023. Officials now say discussions will restart from scratch, citing major changes in the global environment, the trade environment especially, over the past 2 years. The terms of reference will define what the proposed agreement will cover and how negotiations will be conducted. Both India and Canada have already appointed their chief negotiators. India's team will be led by Commerce Department Joint Secretary Brij Mohan Mishra, while Canada has named Bruce Christie as its lead negotiator. Trade ties between the two countries remain substantial. India's exports to Canada rose nearly 10% to $4.22 billion in the last financial year, even as imports from Canada dipped slightly to $4.44 billion. Overall, bilateral trade in goods and services stood at a massive $18.38 billion back in 2023.